Welcome to episode 4 of Gun Guides, where I show you how to get, use, and master every gun family in Spiral Knights. In this episode, I'll be explaining the Magnus family of guns. When building your Magnus gun, there are 3 different 5-star options to choose from. The piercing damage Callahan, the normal damage Iron Slug, and the shadow damage Winter Grave. The Iron Slug and the Callahan both inflict stun, while the Winter Grave inflicts freeze. The Iron Slug and the Callahan both build from the same 3-star, but the Winter Grave builds from a unique 3-star, the Tundris, which is Basil exclusive. Just like Alchemers, the Iron Slug can only attack 2 times before reloading. Each attack will send the player back 1/3 of a tile. The charge attack also fires a much larger shot that pierces through enemies. The damage these guns can deal can be unmatched if they're used right, and there's a lot to remember if you want to get the most value out of your Magnus. Let's start with the charge attack. The Magnus charge isn't only fun to use, but it's also one of the best charge attacks in the game. The knockback the charge causes is the most important thing to understand if you want to get the most value out of it. Normally, knockback pushes enemies away from the knight. Take for instance me shooting these zombies. The Pulsar has knockback that sends every enemy away from me. However, the Magnus charge doesn't work like that at all. In fact, Magnus charges will always knock enemies away from where they're facing. If the charge is fired at an enemy that's facing towards you, the knockback will throw the enemy straight backwards. Facing to the left means the knockback will push the enemy to the right, and if the monster's facing away, the knockback will send them straight into you. Here I use the charge on an enemy that's facing away from me, and the knockback sends them right back at me. This zombie is facing to the right, so the knockback sends it to the left. The Magnus can use this strange knockback to its advantage though. The trick to getting the most out of this charge is to make sure that the enemy is facing your knight when the charge is fired. The knockback will push the enemy straight back into the bullet's path, causing multiple hits. Just look at how much damage this lumber takes. Let's see that again. After rewinding, we can see that my aim is centered on the direction of knockback, and because of this, the lumber will ride my charge attack. Sometimes, you need to be patient when using the charge to make sure that the enemy has time to turn towards you so your charge gets its full damage. In some cases, you can even use walls to help position a good charge attack as well. Even though the enemy isn't facing me directly, the wall will block out the unwanted knockback that would have pushed the enemy out of my charge's path. As a side note, the knockback won't have any effect on a slept enemy or a turret. In cases such as these, lining up the tip of your charge with the enemy usually ends up dealing the most damage. This takes practice though, as you'll need to memorize the exact range of your charge. One last thing about the charge attack, the knockback it has on your knight is much larger than the knockback from the basic attacks. Be careful when using the charge attack, and make sure that you're not going to end up pushing yourself into a ground trap. As a neat little trick, a Deadnot's shield can also be pierced by the charge attack, making them much easier to take care of in some cases. Even though Magnus weapons are great on their own, sometimes they need the help of other weapons to deal the most efficient damage. Bombs that position enemies for the gunner are the best way to maximize Magnus damage. The most useful bombs to use with the Magnus are suction bombs. Popular levels for this kind of combo are stages like Dreams and Nightmares and Vanaduk, where huge waves can be killed with only a few charges. These kind of bombs make Magnus charges hit the most targets possible, without having to worry about where they're facing. The Shivermist Buster can be pretty useful as well. Lining up a charge on targets is easier when they can't move, and this freeze doesn't stop the knockback. While you can get away with only using the charge attack, the Magnus's basic attacks have some great usages as well. The Magnus basic attacks provide the most dependable flinch on enemies. If you want to learn more about the flinching mechanic and how you can use it, I made a separate video that you can find on my channel where I go into more detail on the subject. The Magnus line has very weak flash charges. Flashing a basic attack will fire an extra shot at normal range, and flashing the charge attack will cause an extra explosion at the tip of the charge. If you fire it too late, your charge will entirely disappear as well. The only reason to flash this charge is for the extra damage. The Magnus line has options for every damage but elemental, so let's take a closer look at what sets each one apart. The Callahan provides the knight with piercing damage. Enemies that are weak to piercing, such as fiends and beasts, can be quite difficult to hit with Magnus charge attacks. The Callahan is more popular for its basic attacks than its charge. Landing one Callahan basic attack can allow for an easy chain of more basic attacks. The charge becomes easier to land when the previously mentioned bombs are used. As a side note, Wolvers are unable to dodge during their attack charge up, so moving into their attack path to use a charge is a good way to guarantee full damage. The Wintergrave provides knights with shadow damage. The Wintergrave is good for its basic attacks and its charge attack. The basic attacks are great at flinch chaining gremlins, meanwhile the charge is good against both gremlins and slimes. The only thing that makes this gun slightly bad is that its freeze cancels out its own knockback, meaning that enemies caught in the charge will oftentimes only take 1 or 2 hits and become frozen. To counteract this, you can use strong fire to overpower the freeze. Sources of strong fire are weapons such as the Combustor, Fang of Vogue, or Celestial Vortex. Using this fire prevents the freeze from happening, letting the Wintergrave pierce properly. If you don't have access to strong fire, using the tip of the charge against the frozen target is a good way to deal damage as well. The Iron Slug is the normal damage variant of the Magnus line. The damage this thing deals is amazing. The basic attacks are decent, but the charge is where this weapon shines. Almost every single enemy in the game can be one-shot by this weapon's charge attack. The normal damage allows the Iron Slug to see unmatched effectiveness in most, if not every level in the game. A serious musket for every vanguard. Magnuses are great weapons that can be used against every enemy type and every level in the game. The bullets are large, so the weapon is easy to aim with, and the charge attacks can one-shot nearly every monster. Above all else, this weapon is seriously satisfying to use. Seeing your charge mow through enemies is one of the most satisfying things in Spiral Knights. Well, that wraps up my guide on the Magnus line. Do you think I missed an important Magnus mechanic, or have a gun line you'd like to see me cover next? Let me know.